Good afternoon, everybody. Arrastion, buenas tardes. For this final session for today, it's a big pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Mark Roger Evans. But before his talk, I would like to say something about him. Mark Rogers Evans is a true citizen of the world, born of Basque and Welsh parents, brought up in the UK, and he has worked and studied in Canada, in the UK, in Spain, and for the last 20 years in Switzerland. Mark and I have known each other for almost 2 decades. When my future, in that time, sister-in-law asked me to show him the surroundings of Bilbao and the Guggenheim Museum. And in that time, I was doing my doctorate program, and I was a bit lost, and he supported me because I didn't know what to do, and I was even thinking of moving to the UK again. And at the same time, Mark, in that time, finished his postdoc, studies in chemistry, and joined Hoffmann La Roche in Basel, Switzerland, as a chemist. Since then, he has written more than 100 publications and patents, some of them which have topped the 10 downloaded articles of the year, as well as contributed to a number of clinical compounds, including the broad-spectrum antibiotic ceftobiprole. More recently, he was asked by Roche to become the global head of sustainability communications, as a role in which he also led Roche's 2016 submission to the annual Dow Jones Sustainability Index. But I think it's better to listen to him, to listen to his adventures from science to sustainability. For me, it's a big pleasure to introduce and present Mark Rogers. Please, the floor is yours.
That's it. Thank you. So thank you very much, Carmen. Thank you also to Ivan from Biscaya Talent for inviting me here, and to the organizers of Science Plus. It's a real pleasure to be here and come to talk to you a little bit about what's happened to me. I'm going to tell you a few stories about how I started doing what I'm doing now, the journey, and hopefully there will be some reflections there for yourselves, because I faced many questions and adventures during this process, and I hope you can relate to some of them. So I would really like to start off with this question, why? It's a very important question. It's a question that I continuously ask myself before every major decision, and I hope it's a question that you ask yourselves. In other words, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you here now? What is your purpose? And I think the why is much more important than the what and the how. The why comes first. And if you've ever seen a presentation by Simon Sinek, one of the TED Talks, you know what I'm talking about. But this is a fundamental question, because you've got to know why you're doing what you're doing, to really believe in it, to carry on with it, to carry on despite many difficulties. In other words, to have a real purpose to what you're doing. It could be that your purpose is money. To earn a lot of money, that's fine if you're clear about it. But you might have another purpose, and it's very important to be very clear about that. So I'm going to be challenging myself in a way, during this journey with this why. Why did I do what I did? So it all began really when I was a small boy. And forgive me for being a little bit nervous, but I have my mother here who's traveled up. She's from Santurce. And she traveled up to see me, so I can see her eyes on me, and she'll be either agreeing with me, or I don't remember it was like that, but it was like this, I promise you. So I was around 6 years old in London, And my mum and dad bought me a chemistry set, this Merit chemistry set. This is a photograph of it. And so, as you are influenced by your parents and your environment, I got very interested in chemistry. But I had another interest because they also bought me a big book on rockets. And I also imagined becoming an astronaut, as a lot of young boys and young girls do. So I always had these kind of two pillars in my mind when I was growing up. Inevitably, I studied chemistry. I went to school, but I found chemistry rather dry. It was a dry subject somehow. It was a lot of empirical data. But I couldn't really see myself doing anything else, so I sort of kept with it. And I was studying chemistry, and I went to university studying chemistry. And then something a bit strange happened. So I went to university where we had a sandwich year. So this is the third year you have the chance to spend outside the university and join industry. And at the time, I liked polymer chemistry more than anything else. I thought polymer chemistry was great, simply because I didn't have to study it. Somehow I just seemed to know the answers to the questions, and so I was kind of dragged in this direction. And so the professor came up to me and said, "Listen, Mark, for your industrial year out, would you like to go to NASA and work on the Challenger space program and stick tiles on the space shuttle and think about the polymer compound, to research what additives you would need to stick?" This was a big problem at the time. This is around 81 or so, 82, because in the early space shuttles, the tiles were falling off. So they had to stick on about 22,000 tiles. It took about 2 man-years of work. And he presented me with this, and I couldn't believe it, because if you remember, I was into space and rockets and everything like this. But at that time also, I had my first girlfriend. And the girlfriend was not going to NASA, was not going to America, but was going to be in that area. So then the question is, do I choose rockets or do I choose the girlfriend? Well, it was the girlfriend, of course. So I decided to swap into an area of chemistry that I didn't know that much about, but I could live near her, or I could study near her, and I went to join Beecham's and studied organic chemistry. And so I had to get into this new area of chemistry, and actually this was a big fork in my life, because from polymer chemistry to organic chemistry, and then I went on starting to understand chemistry from the organic perspective, from the organic synthesis perspective. So the why there was a little bit nebulous, I would say. Not very clear at that time, as it often is when you're younger, because you don't have enough information. These days, there's a lot more information available. So I studied organic chemistry, and the more I studied it, the more I got into it. And I joined a small biotech company in the UK after the PhD and first postdoc in London. But I noticed something. Every few months, a new person joined the company, and they always were promoted in front of me, or they took a position in front of me. And sometimes when I spoke with them, I thought, okay, they're good, but I don't see anything very special about them. But they had one characteristic. They had gone abroad, and they had done a postdoc abroad. So after a couple of years, I had a word with my boss, and I said, "Listen, I'm getting a little bit frustrated here, because I'm working hard, but I feel that I have a disadvantage." So he says, "You know what, Mark, I will support your application to go abroad." So he contacted somebody who he knew very well, Professor Victor Sneakus, in the University of Waterloo in Canada, and he wrote to him. And I remember Victor phoning me Christmas Eve or something like this, and saying, "Listen, Mark, I have an application here from you. I've spoken with your boss. Would you like to come over to Canada?" And I said, "Well, can I think about it?" He says, "Yeah, you can think about it, but if you want to come, you have to start here January the 3rd, a few days later." So that was a very tough decision, but I decided to go to Canada. And it really changed my life, I have to say. And this is what I would really recommend to you, is whenever you have a chance to do something different, to take a risk, to leave our beloved Spain, which is very difficult to do because it's such a fantastic country, take it. because you see everything from a different perspective. And when I went to Canada, I actually thought, I was a little bit cocky. I thought I was quite good at chemistry. I went to Canada, realized I knew nothing, zero. And I had to study very, very hard to increase my level. But I had a fabulous year, also from the point of view of culture, because I met people from all over the world who were also studying, and we did things like ice hockey and different things like this. But I really started to appreciate organic chemistry, and I realized this is what I wanted to pursue. I found it very interesting, particularly organic synthesis. I won't go on to tell you about the specialities of Victor Sneakers, what he did. Let's say at the time he was quite a famous guy. People knew him. And after working with one of these big professors in the United States or wherever, it doesn't matter where it is, it really helps with your career, because one reference letter from them and you have the place that you want. So that's what happened. I came back to Europe, and because of his reference, I jumped straight into Hoffmann La Roche, which is a very big pharma company, very successful pharma company with a headquarters in Basel in Switzerland. Has about 93,000 people working around the world, almost in every country. It's especially known for its oncology drugs. It has sales of about 50 billion Swiss francs, more or less the same in euros per year. It's divided into pharmaceuticals and diagnostics, and it specializes in personalized medicine. It's almost a family-owned company, family-run company, in as much as there's a block of shares owned by the family. So decisions taken are quite responsible, and they feel a pressure, for example, to keep the reputation clean and to make sure that people are treated properly within the company. So I would say, from the professional perspective of being able to do excellent science, it ticked the box. And from the perspective of joining a company that would look after you, it ticked the box. But all of this only started because I took the risk to go to Canada. I'm sure if I'd stayed in UK, I wouldn't have had a chance to go to Roche. So I started in Roche, and I started as a process research chemist, which is basically synthetic chemistry. Synthetic chemistry, no more, no less. They give you a compound and they say, make it safer, more efficient, more technical, but basically you can't change the structure at all. And after a couple of years, I decided that I did want to change the structure. And I started to think to myself, what if we extend this molecule? What if we do this? What if I want to work in cancer and not CNS or something like this, the brain? So I decided to make an unusual move, going from process research to medicinal chemistry. Most people go the other way towards the public. So you go, say, process research to technical to manufacturing, commercial or whatever. I went the other way, and I went to medicinal chemistry. And in fact, this is Building 92. I actually worked before, just behind here, and then my office for many years was here as I swapped to medicinal chemistry. But the problem with medicinal chemistry is it's not the same as synthetic chemistry, not at all. Now, in universities these days, they give you a bit more tuition, but when I was younger, in my university, there was very little medicinal chemistry tuition. So I had to really learn. I had to learn about medicinal chemistry. And this is another big lesson. No matter how old you are, where you are, never, ever stop learning. If you're 64 and you've got a year to go in the company, keep on learning, get the books out. You never know what might happen, and that knowledge is absolutely essential. So I was always trying to make sure that I knew what was happening left and right on my topic. So I started studying medicinal chemistry, and it was tough, but we have this adage in England, keep calm, everything will be okay. So I just studied and found out that I really loved medicinal chemistry, and of course had a lot more choice about directing the type of chemistry that I would be doing. I don't know if any of you are chemists here, organic chemists, but one of the topics that I began to think about, again, bringing up this why question is, a lot of drugs, a lot of medicines are based on a kind of a framework which is two-dimensional, which is like the benzene ring. Have you noticed in almost every medicine you have this flat, 6-carbon circular structure? And I asked myself, why is that? Why do we always use a benzene ring as a basic scaffold? Why can't we make this more multi-dimensional? Why can't we put some angles in as the basic core? I don't mean as an appendage, as the basic core. So I looked to Professor Correa in ETH in Zurich, very good university in Zurich, And I discussed this concept with him, and I was just drawing things down, literally on a serviette, and said, what do you think about this? And he was interested. So we designed a couple of projects together, and we recruited an excellent PhD student. So again, a kind of a collaboration, so between industry and academia. And this was very productive because this PhD student was fabulous. We interviewed him, he was full of energy. He synthesized these molecules, and he did it very efficiently, and we were able to publish in good journals, very good journals. There was a lot of interest because they could solve a lot of problems. And I won't go into exactly what they do, but basically it's all around, the major publications were all around this oxetane ring, which is a kind of a substitute for a carbonyl group. And I won't go into it, but basically there's many things you can do by substituting an oxetane for a carbonyl in terms of hydrogen bonding and other things. But that's what we did, and that was very nice, very exciting. And interestingly, the student, George Vichik, who worked on this project, because of the affiliation with myself and with Roche, where is he working now? Hoffmann La Roche. So it was a very nice path for him from the university into industry. He's now in process research, where I was. He's doing extremely well. He's a fantastic chemist. Following that, we hired a postdoc, a Chinese postdoc, to make some more complex molecules. And this guy, his English was pretty basic, but he was a marvelous synthetic chemist. And all I had to do was just kind of mention something, and he would go away and go to the lab, and underground even, actually, and make it. And it was a really fantastic collaboration. With him, I kept in contact with him, and because we had an affiliation, because we had a collaboration, I did everything to try and get him a great place after ETH, which was more of a challenge than for George because his English was pretty bad and his presentation skills were not fantastic, but he was a wonderful chemist. So again, this collaborative affair is very, very important to remember. And then there's this question of mentorship, which I'll just touch upon, which Natalie in her talk this morning mentioned about how important it is. I'm going to mention mentorship a number of times, but this was the first time I sort of encountered it myself, because with the Chinese postdoc, he was quite a challenge, to communicate with and so on. And it was just great learning more about him and trying to help him. And at the same time, I helped myself by understanding how he thought, because he was an outstanding chemist. So this is what I was involved with, more or less 2008 to 2011, at the same time as doing medicinal chemistry projects. But I tend to get bored a little bit quickly. And I, again, asking myself, why? Why am I doing synthetic chemistry? Okay, why am I doing medicinal chemistry? And I started to think, I'm getting a little bit fed up with this. I want to understand more about what happens to that molecule, how it interacts with its partner in the body or wherever, if you're testing in animals. So I was looking a lot at YouTube and the computer and everything, and I came across this professor who was investigating zebrafish. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, you and I have got a lot more in common with zebrafish than we like to think. We have many, many genes which we share with zebrafish. They're vertebrates, they're easy to breed, and there's lots of things that you can do with zebrafish. For example, screening compounds that will give you a lot of interesting information, and by the way, perhaps save testing on mice and rats and so on. So ethically, a very robust organism as well. So I invited Professor Randy Peterson from Harvard Medical School and Broad Institute to Roche and asked him to give a talk with Callum McRae, who's another zebrafish specialist. The company liked it, so then I built upon that and I went to the company, to 2 funding bodies, and I said, listen, why can't we test our drugs in zebrafish? And about that time, I also came to BioBead in San Sebastian, quite close by, and took a look at their facilities, and I was really impressed by what they were doing. Little company, doing fantastic work with zebrafish, but more on the toxicity side. This was more on the efficacy side. So I just said, listen, we're interested in things like schizophrenia and autism. What about if we genetically engineer the zebrafish to overexpress proteins which are indicated in the human pathology of those diseases, and we test our compound collections against them and see how they behave? In other words, you see the fish behaving in a particular way when these genes are overexpressed. You add your compounds. If that behavior is reversed or changed significantly, maybe you have a compound which is helping the human condition. Well, the company liked this, and they gave me 2.5 million Swiss francs to pursue the idea with Randy Peterson. So again, the why question really helped. Even something which I suffer from, which is getting bored very quickly, it helped. And here is something that I guess is a little bit unusual for a synthetic chemist to go out and do. But again, there wasn't much around at the time. It just began with a question, but with a question, you have an answer, then comes the passion, and then if you keep driving, you get other people interested and you start a collaboration. So this work is still going on. It's going very well, and in fact, I could talk about this project for some time, but basically, you have lots of interesting things that you can do with zebrafish, which gives you a lot of information and cuts down the number of compounds that you have to test on the animals for further validation. And it also gives you extra information like toxicity, so it saves you a lot of safety studies, not just the efficacy studies that you're doing in the zebrafish. Around this time, again, I was getting a little bit frustrated, but the frustration was in another area. Hoffmann-La Roche is in Basel, and what you find is that there's tremendous enthusiasm within the company for science, but if you pop outside the company with the general public, they don't know much about what we're doing, and in fact, pharma has got a bad reputation. They just feel that people are earning a lot of money, compounds are medicines are being tested on people perhaps they shouldn't be tested on, all sorts of things. So I said, listen, we have got an absolutely beautiful museum. This was built by the pension fund by a very famous architect called Botta, just outside Hoffmann-La Roche. And I said, I would love to have an exhibition about science and about medicine in this museum. And it so happened that the 120-year anniversary of the company was coming up, and they were looking to have exhibitions on different aspects of the company. So again, they gave me 1.2 million to put an exhibition in here. And this was really out of the blue. You know, I had a question, I was asking some people, they connected me with somebody else, and suddenly it all came together. It was very nice. So I worked with about 29 people putting this exhibition together and just drew on past experiences. So here you see the zebrafish going across a screen. Here you see those compact molecules on a screen and the people looking around. We worked with an agency in Zurich and put all this together, and unfortunately, literally 6 weeks before it was supposed to open, excuse me, the whole thing was cut. Not just this exhibition, but everything that was going to celebrate the 120th anniversary, because they were renovating a lot of buildings and they feared that there would be a problem with the public coming around and with things falling on them and everything. They stopped the whole project. So the agency were heartbroken because they really put so much effort into this. And I went to the leadership and I said, listen, okay, the other things I understand, but this is separate to the company, outside the company. Why can't we go ahead with it? They said, hold on, Mark, we'll go and speak with the head of Roche and come back to you. They came back 2 weeks' time, said, we discussed it. We decided no, but we really appreciate your enthusiasm. And then, about 6 weeks, 2 months later, the same guy came back and said, you know what? You seem to have an interest in many things. How about combining your interest, your scientific interest? By the way, I haven't spoken about, I was also interested in antibody drug conjugates, and I was trying to do things in that area as well. Why don't you put it all together and head up our sustainability communication department? So this was something completely different. And again, it's the question why. Why would I do this instead of science that I'd studied all my life? And I just decided this was an excellent use of my time in terms of my beliefs, my personal beliefs, because sustainability really means the impact that the company has. In other words, the way that it does its business. Can it continue to be successful in the future, but for example, having a very low impact on the environment, treating its people well, having ethical business practices and so on. I thought this is right up my street. Plus, you have to have an understanding of how a company works, which is what I always try to do. So this seemed to fit very, very nicely. And it allowed me, before I was seen as a bit of a troublemaker in the company, I was always asking questions, why do we do this? Why don't we do this? And here I had a license to really ask these questions to all parts of the company and gather that information in. So I took this position, but actually, one thing is on paper, it sounds very nice and everything to be promoted, head of department and all of this business. But first of all, it was in communications, completely different topic, and it was about sustainability, which I knew virtually nothing about. So this really was a tremendous challenge, and I had to become really fluent with all of these aspects about what business we do, how we do our business, how it affects our employees, and what effects it has on the environment. And the stress test of this is an annual report, which the company has as its part of its goals, annual goals. There is an investment sensitive index called the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. It comes out every year, and it measures the top 10% of the largest companies in the world in different sectors about how they are carrying out their business practices. And the reason why investors are interested in this ranking and this information is because they have pension funds, lots of funds, millions, at least millions of euros, and they want to be sure that if they commit to a company for 10 years or 20 years, that company is going to continue to do well. So it's critical to know they must have an independent ranking of the companies. So I led our submission for 2016. Let me just go on to here. And it really was a challenge, I can tell you. I've never worked so hard in my life, sometimes 20 hours a day. Extremely rewarding, but very, very tiring because you have to reach out to all the company, gather this data. It's kind of like non-financial reporting, and then submit it in a particular style that the people who look at it will understand and will grade you appropriately. Well, thank goodness, we'd already won it 7 times in a row. In 2016, we won it 8 times in a row with the highest score we ever attained. And this was because of a fantastic collaboration we had throughout the company to gather the information and also with consultants to make sure that the data fitted the expectations of the people looking at it. At the same time, as a byproduct, a carbon disclosure project, this is another way of rating companies based on how much CO2 they're producing. This is a very well-regarded rater. It's something that Hoffmann La Roche also participates in because these 2 things, Robeco, SAM, CDP, according to independent raters, are 2 of the most highly regarded raters in the industry. So it's not that we cherry-pick things that we're good at, we actually choose the things which are the most respected indices. I'd just like to say something about Roche. So I'm absolutely not here to publicize Roche or to say Roche is fantastic because the pharma companies, many of them work in very, very similar ways. But sometimes people think, well, what are the pharma companies doing? They're just sometimes inventing things, maybe even inventing the disease and inventing the medicine to fit the disease or whatever goes around. I can promise you this is absolutely not the case. And in the case of Roche, for example, we have many medicines which are on the WHO essential medicine list. These are, almost all of them, I think 27 are off patent. So there's no revenue coming to Roche, but Roche still, in many cases, supplies the medicines to all parts of the world. And there are some medicines from Roche which have been spectacular in their efficacy. So Bactrim, for example, has been calculated to have successfully treated 2 billion people as an antibiotic in its lifetime, in its life cycle, which is quite impressive. That's it for Roche. Now, just to take a little pause to talk about some of the things which drive me, because some things, you have to do because you're working within a company or an environment, or in your case, perhaps within a university, you're on a degree course, you have to complete it. You're doing a PhD, you have to complete it. That's all well and good. But what else are you doing? So my passions are definitely talent development. Something that gives me the most joy. I had about 23 students passing through my lab when I was a process research chemist and a medicinal chemist. And I can tell you there's nothing like seeing a student who comes in not knowing so much and leaving knowing quite a bit. And actually, just 3 weeks ago, I was visiting my mum, and I got a call, and she was a little bit irritated that I was not paying enough attention to the family. And I got this call from a student that I had a few years ago. And he says, "Mark, I just want to thank you." And I said, "What's happened?" He said, "Well, I was in your lab. You helped me work for this Eric Carrera in ETH, and now I'm going to work for Stuart Schreiber in Harvard." Stuart Schreiber is like, Hollywood A-list of chemical biologists. He's really a superstar, and to get to work for him is almost impossible, and this guy managed it. And he was just giving me a quick call, even though I hadn't heard from him in about 5 years, to say thank you. And I cannot tell you, I felt absolutely wonderful. And this thing about reverse mentoring, so when you help other people, you're helping yourself actually. Because in trying to guide other people or teach other people from your mistakes, from what happens to them and what they tell you, you learn yourself. And it's really wonderful. And I would say whenever you have a chance to attach yourself to various people and help them on their way, this is really a feel-good factor. And in fact, when I was in Roche and I wasn't sure what to do, I reached out to somebody. I didn't believe in the mentoring, the formal mentorship, but I reached out to somebody who was actually younger than me because I saw that they had something that I needed, and this was a fantastic relationship, and now we're very firm friends after many years. And I would say, please go ahead with this relationship building. It's absolutely critical for your professional futures. The other passion, of course, is the patient. So it's all well and good working on things, working on research projects, working on esoteric ideas, but what I really love to see is that there's an effect on the patient. And more than once I've gone to the hospital, talked with patients to find out what their experiences are when they receive the drugs which are being given to them by the company and others, and to see how they progress and how their health gets better, hopefully better. Personal passions, so those are those sort of professional passions, personal passions. I had a tremendous passion for yoga, which, truth be told, has just swapped now for the gym. So while I was in Switzerland, I was doing yoga all the time. I found it absolutely fantastic. And for some reason, so I've just recently, 2 months ago, moved to Barcelona, and I just loved going down to the gym. And I would say, if you're working very hard, this is something that I would completely encourage. Either yoga, meditation, going to the gym, having the balance in your life. It's absolutely critical when you're working long hours and you don't have much sleep. This kind of gives you back energy. And dancing. I was mad keen on Latin dancing, salsa, merengue, bachata, vallenato, and so on. I went to South America 7 times to, let's say, perfect my technique. And, and I love to do it. And I went dancing the other day, and I'm a bit rusty now, but I absolutely love it, the rhythm and going through the body. And anything to balance your life, I would say go for it. So I would like to thank you very much for listening to my stories, but I would also like to invite you to any questions you would like to ask. I don't mind what they are, how controversial, whatever aspect. You can even ask them, puedes preguntarme en español si quieres, sin embargo que no puedo contestar bien, pero I'm going to answer you in English. But that's it for now. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any question? Una pregunta? No. Me gustaría, ya lo he dicho antes, para mí fue importante el momento en que le conocí, porque yo estaba empezando con mi doctorado y demás, y no encontraba, estaba muy perdida. Al final yo no he acabado la tesis doctoral, no soy PhD, pero he encontrado mi camino. y un poco conociéndole todo lo que ha estado mencionando, es, bueno, y toda esta mañana, durante todo el día, todos los ponentes han estado comentando la importancia de sentir una pasión, de que te guste lo que haces, y ese es el triunfo, ¿no? Y de encontrar equilibrio en tu vida personal, ¿no? Y que te puedes mover, lo comentaban todos los ponentes. Yo no sé qué preguntarte porque yo sé muchas cosas, son ellos, y si no, pues damos por... ¿Sí? Vale, it's okay. Oops, sorry.
Hello, thank you very, very much for your talk. I enjoyed it a lot. And the question is out of the scientific, but it's more kind of personal. It's fantastic, all your achievements. Did you manage to make a balance for doing both life, personal life, family life, and finding the energies, the time to do all this? I mean, is it possible to do both fantastically from your point of view, at least?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's actually the question that I enjoy and fear, is this question. Something you have to pay somewhere. There's only so much time. There's only so much of the candle you can burn. I would say because of the travels, because of the amount of dedication, definitely the personal life has suffered. Not so much with friends, but for personal relationships it's tough. If you're moving continuously geographically, if you're working very long hours, if you are, for example, only available for, 3.5, 4 hours some days, and you're dead tired, it's not really conducive with a balance. However, I feel at the same time it's important to go through some experiences to learn. And it doesn't matter, at what stage of your life you learn. So I tend to get very carried away, and, when I get into something, I really pursue it. And I should say, yes, there are some achievements. I don't know if they're fantastic achievements or great achievements. I wouldn't consider myself to have a sort of higher education capacity than anybody else. However, if there's something that I like and it fits in with my interest and it becomes a passion, I really work hard and I focus and I bring everything to bear on it. And this means, of course, sacrificing other things. So I would say there have been sacrifices. The reason why I included the slides on the dancing and the yoga and everything like this is because what I find is you have to put limits. So in direct relation, you must put limits. You must not go overboard. It's okay maybe a year or 2 years, but not further than this. And it's very important to ask the question, why? What is my purpose? And is my purpose just to work? Is my purpose just to make a discovery? Because it's quite nice being invited to a conference and, this stuff that we did with the oxetanes and the spiroazetidines and so on. I mean, I won prizes for this. It was very nice having presentations. But, there's no presentation for, a successful relationship or not or whatever, So I would say it's very important to have the balance in your life and to install this. So if you have a hobby that you can install from a relatively young age and you keep on doing it during this process, that will be ideal. I have tended to discover my hobbies rather later in my professional career. But now I can tell you, I go to the gym Monday to Friday, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and I will never break that because I see the benefits of it, for example. But thank you for your question.
No tengáis, ya es la última, pero no tengáis miedo de acercaros al...
Gracias. I just have a question out of curiosity. The thing is that you talk about zebrafish and humans, that they have the common relative
Gene expression.
genes, exactly. The problem is that I have fishes at home, and I cannot tell if they are happy, if they are sad, if there's something happening. So I would like to know that how do you know how the drug is affecting those fishes? Exactly, how can you know that if the effect is good or bad? Because there could be that the drugs could have like 2 different types, cis and trans, and there could be one could affect in a positive way, another one negative. But
Sure.
how can you surely know in the fishes?
Well, one thing that I didn't go into is that we weren't actually experimenting on fishes, we were experimenting on zebrafish larvae. So we can put 10 of these larvae into a well. So really we have a lot of larvae and we're doing high throughput screening. So the larvae are sort of having a particular motion, and when you overexpress certain genes, they have another type of motion which you track, and that gives a signature. Then you add your compound, and then this does something else to usually their locomotion, and you measure this. So how they are feeling, honestly, we don't know, but let's say that is considered to be absolutely ethical at this stage of their development. There is a certain stage in the development of a zebrafish. It's different between Europe and America, where they say above this age you have to have special permission to do any experimentation at all. But with the larvae, everybody agrees that the system isn't sufficiently developed to cause any particular pain or whatever. And it's certainly, I believe, much more ethical than experimenting on mice and rats, where you really could have a significant effect. And actually, the other advantage with zebrafish is that there's some organs, for example, and some neuronal pathways which are much more relevant to humans than rat and mice are. So there's many reasons for using zebrafish. But I would say these larvae did not suffer, and they give a clue. But of course, before you progress, the way that drugs are developed, you still have to put them into higher animals, because of course there's no way you're going to jump from fish to human. That would be unethical. Thank you for your question.
Hello, thank you for your talk. The question is a short one, just to know which is the biggest challenge that you found when you start analyzing the sustainability in such a big company?
That's a good question. I mean, there were so many new topics. I think the biggest one actually was to work with the establishment, with what was there, because at that level you're tremendously exposed, so everybody's looking at your work and everybody has their expectations. So you make one decision, it could be challenged by the head of the company, or it could be in line with the head of the company, but somebody beside you in another department says, you can't do that, this is affecting our product flow, or this is affecting our advertising, or this is affecting our message. So almost whatever decision you make, somebody has a comment on it. And this is very difficult because at first you're tremendously worried by these comments because they're coming into your mailbox. And as a scientist, I used to get 20 mails a day. In this position, I don't know, 500 mails a day. Many of them complaining. You could spend your whole time just answering mails and saying, I'm very sorry, but actually blah, 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 you know. That was, I think, the biggest challenge, even more than learning so many new things. Actually, it's fun to learn new things because to know how a company works intrinsically, this is really interesting. But then you have to learn how to transmit that information so you're on message, you have a company message, a single message, and then diplomacy, that you're not upsetting every other department in the company. This, for me, was the biggest lesson. I'm not sure if I ever fully learned it, but let's say I made quite a bit of progress. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. I wanted to ask you a bit about your impressions about human resources policies in such a big company, and I explain myself. One of the things that are under debate now in the policy making of public research institutions and such, is that the human resources policies are at least not very professional yet. So that the researcher profession is not understood as something that needs to be taken seriously in terms of, as I say, policy, gender equality, work-life balance, awards, and that researchers have a clear idea of how to promote in the academia. And we are looking into that and trying to find out how to set up good research, human resources policies in this area. And I just wanted to ask you, what are your impressions about the human resources policies in Roche or in multinationals?
Well, I found that we had an evolving HR policy, for example, for recruiting in R&D, that was becoming very healthy because of the input of the scientists. So, 20 years ago, where you had HR specialists making decisions and just looking for a yes or no at the end of the process, had limited success. And then what we found was we had the departments themselves, in our case, Department of Chemistry, where you had someone within the chemistry department driving that process. So they would look at almost all the applications. They would be involved in every aspect of the hiring. And human resources would be there to guide things, for example, about salary expectations, but they wouldn't certainly be overriding the scientist's choice. And, if somebody was invited, they were invited to present in front of the scientists. The scientists would ask them a number of questions and so on. So it was almost a very democratic process, because at the end of the day, that person would be coming in and working with colleagues. So certainly within R&D, I felt it was quite well evolved, but that was really an evolution. I mean, it didn't start like that. That was something that happened during my time there. It also took the drive of one particular person who just says, you know what, some people are applying and people are not replying. Some people in some cases, they had double messages, accepted and not accepted, and, some years ago. And so we tightened this process up so that there was a single point of contact to make sure this flowed. So I think it's the involvement of the department where the person will be hired, and also the passion of somebody there to be the kind of the coordinator to make sure that the message is always constant and each person gets one message which is appropriate. And also, if it's a negative message, but they're still talented, they have a talented application, that this application is put into a depository which is active and not just the garbage. It's in a database which is still scanned for keywords and so on, or in the person's memory, and just say, okay, now we have a position or whatever. So I would say, from the point of Hoffmann-La Roche, it evolved. For the other companies, I can't really speak with authority, but certainly I would say it developed quite well within Roche.
No more questions? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.